are a week and a half away from NFL free agency getting underway, but we're going to talk about some Miami Dolphins trade rumors on today's episode. I am Nic Rohloff. This is the Dolphins Today by Chat Sports because in the offseason, there's multiple ways to upgrade your roster, free agency, through the draft, and through trades. And with NFL Combine Week going on, we have a lot of news and rumors about players that are available via trade. And these three across the last 48 hours have become available on the trade market. Jaire Alexander, corner from Green Bay, the offensive guard from Los Angeles, Jonah Jackson, and an old friend of ours, Davon Godchaux, defensive lineman who's been on the Patriots. All three are playing a position of need for the Miami Dolphins, which is why we're talking about them on today's show. But I want to make sure you're following me over on Twitter/X because when the reports came out initially about these three individually being available on the trade market, I shared my instant reaction and feelings on potentially going after them. So if you want to be up to date before we come and talk about it on YouTube, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Nic_Rohloff. All right, we'll start with Jaire Alexander because the report from Rappaport is that the Packers have already had trade conversations centered around Jaire Alexander. It's been widely speculated that Alexander will be on the move this offseason, but this tweet all but confirms it. Alexander has been one of the top corners in football in the past, 28 years old, two-time Pro Bowler, and it's an interesting target for the Dolphins. Now, if you are interested in Alexander, I do want to warn you, there are a lot of things that give me cause for concern. One of them is his contract. He has 2 years left. It was a front-loaded contract that he received, so he isn't as expensive as he has been in the past, but you do have to take on a pretty hefty base deal of $16.1 million this season, and you would be on the hook for $18.1 million in 2026 before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. So the price tag is pretty high. And the Miami Dolphins do need a corner. Yeah, they claimed Ryan Cooper Jr. about 72 hours ago earlier this week. But as of right now, all Miami has at the cornerback position is Jalen Ramsey, Cooper Jr., Storm Duck, Ethan Bonner, and Cam Smith. So they're going to have to add someone on the outside and maybe even bring back Kader Kohou, who is a restricted free agent. But the issue I have with Alexander potentially is that contract, plus he just doesn't play many football games. Like over the past 2 seasons, he has only played 7 games apiece. Now his numbers are still pretty good. Had a down year in 2023, but bounced back in the limited time he played in 2024, putting up much better numbers, good completion percentage allowed, quarterback rating was solid, took a couple passes away too, had a couple interceptions. But like I mentioned, the issue with Alexander is not the player. It is the fact that he cannot stay on the football field, and we know the Dolphins have had too many injury-prone players on their team already. Look at the last 4 seasons for Jaire. He was a Pro Bowler in 2022 and in 2020, but in 2021, 4 games. And the last 2 years, 7 games apiece. Miami needs players that can stay on the football field. And the issue I have with Alexander is that it's always non-issue or tissue injuries or anything like that. Like it's always like a hamstring or a quad or something like that. It's never like a bruise or anything like that. Like he's always having tissue injuries, which gives me cause for concern. And I am skeptical of potentially trading for Jaire Alexander because of his contract and his injury history. But what say you? Should you trade for Jaire Alexander? Listen, on paper, if they stay healthy, an Alexander-Ramsey cornerback duo would be pretty fun to watch. But let me know your thoughts. Type Y for yes, type N for no. I'm typing my N's. I'm taking my P's. I am passing on Jaire Alexander. I do not think it's a good idea for the Dolphins to pursue a Jaire Alexander trade, even though he's got great name value and you could probably get him for a 5th, 6th round pick. His price tag over the next 2 seasons of $16.1 million and $18.1 million is just too high for a player that has played just 16-plus games, 1 out of the last 3 seasons. Playing in 7 games in 2023 and 2024 does not give me a lot of confidence. Miami needs to rebuild their defense with younger, cheap players that are durable, not these aging veterans on big contracts that struggle to play on the football field. All right, let's get over to another trade target here. This one's Jonah Jackson from the offensive line, Jeremy Fowler, who actually in his original tweet named him Jonah Williams, which is a different player in the NFL. It's Jonah Jackson that the Rams are giving permission to seek a trade. Former Detroit Lions offensive guard signed a 3-year, $51 million contract with Los Angeles last year, but only played in 4 games. We'll tell you more about that in just a second. But Jonah Jackson's contract is much more doable for Miami than Jaire Alexander's. Why? Well, it's because he's actually only due $9 million if acquired by Miami in a trade this season. Now, that number does jump up to $17 million in 2026, a base of $9 million over the next 2 seasons, a roster bonus of $8 million in 2026. But here's the good news with his contract. If you acquire him, you can see how it goes in 2025 for a cheap $9 million offensive guard. If he stays healthy and plays well, you can just extend him and spread out that roster bonus. Or if he stinks and doesn't fit your system, well, you can just cut him before the roster bonus kicks in. And guess what? You don't have that much money you owe to Jonah Jackson. And the reason why I do want to bring this up is because it's pretty important to note that this was his 5th season in the NFL. Spent the first 4 years of his career with the Lions, this year with the Rams. He only played 4 games. He missed basically the entire season due to a fracture in his shoulder, his scapula. Now, this is the first time he's really ever been injured. He was a starter in all 4 seasons with the Detroit Lions. You heard them note earlier he was a Pro Bowler with Detroit in 1 season, and he actually was very durable in those 4 years. So I think this past season being injured with the Rams was more of a, I guess, anomaly, if you will. But we do have to take a look back at his 2023 numbers because there's really not much to talk about in terms of how he played in 2024. And last time we did see him on the football field for Detroit in 23 before he cashed in for that 3-year, $51 million deal. This is how he graded out according to Pro Football Focus. It's really nothing spectacular, if we're going to be honest. When you filter out the guards that barely played and you look at the guards that played 50% of the snaps of the highest amount, he was middle of the pack in pretty much everything. Better pass blocker than a run blocker, which is an intriguing thing to note. But it's not like he's some elite guard, but he is a serviceable starting left guard, which is where he played most of his career, for only $9 million in 2025, which makes him intriguing. And we'll talk about his run blocking numbers and if he's a fit for the Dolphins scheme in here in a second. But make sure you are subscribed to the channel because we break down every piece of news and note around the Miami Dolphins, trade rumors, free agency news, draft stuff. We have you covered. Join the channel today. Let's get over to those run blocking grades in 2023. You saw the overall number just a second ago, but we often talk about how important it is to talk about the zone run blocking numbers from these offensive linemen because that's the scheme that Miami employs with Mike McDaniel. He graded out as a top half offensive guard in 2023 in the zone run blocking scheme, 23rd out of 55, 63.6 overall. Not as good in the gap, but he was a top half run blocker in football, according to Pro Football Focus in 2023, which makes him intriguing. But I'm intrigued for Jonah Jackson trade because of the price. Not only in acquiring him, it would likely only cost a day 3 pick, 5th round, 6th round, 7th round type pick, maybe even a pick swap potentially as well. But also that contract. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. You get him on $9 million this season. Like, that is a pretty good price tag for a starting level guard. And despite the injuries in 2024, he is a starting left guard in the NFL. So having a plug-and-play guy for $9 million is very enticing. And as I mentioned, yeah, it jumps up to $17 million in 2026, but if he doesn't work out, you can release him. And if he does work out, you can lock him in long-term with an extension and spread out that roster bonus. He's only going to be 29, 30 years old at the end of this contract, so there is still a lot of football left for the former third-round pick. I am intrigued with acquiring Jonah Jackson for sure. And before we talk about Devon Godchaux to round out our show, make sure you're hooked up with the best Dolphins gear you can find. Chatsports.com/Dolphins Gray shirt is one example. $5 off this Nike Dolphins tee. It is on sale. Sizes are running out. So get yours today before they are completely out of stock. That link is in the description and comments of today's video. One more time, chatsports.com/Dolphins Gray shirt. Our last player we're talking about today is an old friend of ours, 8-year veteran in the NFL, Davon Godchaux. This one came out latest on Wednesday afternoon. The Patriots are giving him permission to seek a trade because they are moving on with a different type of defensive scheme. Mike Vrabel, Terrell Williams is their new defensive coordinator, and it doesn't sound like Godchaux is going to be a fit. And this is a very familiar face. He's played 8 seasons in the NFL, 4 with New England, 4 with Miami. Well, let's take a look back at his career stats with the Miami Dolphins when he came in the 2017 season. He was pretty solid for Miami. There's no denying that. It's how he got that contract initially in the 2021 free agency period with the New England Patriots, which gave him a pretty decent chunk of change. His best season in terms of statistics came in 2019, but if you actually look at his pure productivity in the run game in terms of stopping the run and complementing that in terms of getting after the passer, 2018, his second year in the NFL, was actually his best with the Miami Dolphins. And he is a cheap contract, too, if you did trade for him. $4.8 million on the books this season, $8.2 million next year, and then as a unrestricted free agent in 2027. And that is what makes him a little bit intriguing to me. He has obviously been in the Dolphins organization in the past, different coaching staff, different scheme, different system now. But could the Dolphins look to pair him up as that second defensive tackle alongside Zach Sealer? I mean, $4.8 million this season is a relatively cheap price tag. And then you could also draft a rookie on day one and pick 13, second round, third round, to be a understudy with Sealer and Godchaux and have a solid 3 defensive tackle rotation. It's an intriguing thing to me because he is a little bit of a good run stopper. And I think a good run stopping nose tackle and interior defensive lineman could really help Zach Sealer because Sealer is really good at both, but he is more of a pass rusher than a run stopper. And that's not telling you that he's a bad run stopper. He is really good at that. But I think complementing him with a good run-stopping guy, that's what they tried to do with Benito Jones and Deshaun Hand this past year. I think Godchaux's on that same tier, maybe slightly higher. It would be cheap to acquire Godchaux, like the other 2 players we mentioned, 6th, 7th-round pick, maybe a 7th-round pick swap potentially as well. It wouldn't be crazy to get him in a trade. It also wouldn't be crazy to pay him this season or next season. And if you didn't like what you saw in 2025, like Jonah Jackson, you could probably cut him going into 2026 and not lose that much money in dead cap. To me, he is another option I could see Miami going after to reunite him in this system. So out of the 3 players that we talked about on today's show, which player would you want to go after the most? The biggest name, Jaire Alexander, probably the best fit in Jonah Jackson, or the old pal, Devon Godchaux? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. I would go after Jonah Jackson if I had to choose one out of these 3. Yeah, Jaire Alexander would be fun. It's the splashy move. But we know the Dolphins need offensive line help on the interior the most. Jackson under contract for 2 more years, a very nice price tag of $9 million this season. And if you strike out on some free agents that you wanted to grab, like a Will Fries, a James Daniels, they ultimately go elsewhere, maybe the Dolphins pivot to Jonah Jackson and trade a day 3 pick to get him. Like I said, $9 million for a starting left guard in this economy is very, very good, especially one that's been to a Pro Bowl in the past. And I know the price tag jumps up in next season, but you can easily lower that cap hit with a restructure following a good year or move off of him if he's not that good. I think Jonah Jackson makes a lot of sense. I actually really want Miami to go do their due diligence and homework on a potential Jackson trade with the Rams. All right, that will do it for today's show. Like I said off the top, make sure you follow on Twitter because if the Dolphins do get linked to any of these players officially in the trade market, I'll let you know first over on the Twitterverse. And if they do make a trade, I'll break the news on my Twitter before making a video on YouTube and going live. So follow on Twitter so you get updated first.